It's great to see everyone tonight, and tonight we have Shay and Austin with us, and we are going to be talking about the book of 1 Kings. We're actually not going to be able to cover that much of it in about 35 minutes, but this whole series, one thing we're doing is going through a week at a time, some questions from the Bible. We deal with one book, try to every week, to try to encourage people to read through the Bible in a year, and so we're trying to go through these questions to encourage people in relationship to that. So let's begin, and we're going to begin in 1 Kings chapter 1. And Shay, if you would like to, read the first question we have, and then Austin will read 1 Kings verses 24 and 25.
According to 1 Kings, who tried to make himself king of Israel when David was close to death? How did David put a stop to this and make Solomon king? Let's read 1 Kings 24, verses 24 and 25, and then 38 and 39.
Okay, Austin, if you would, read 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 24 and 25. Who tried to make himself king when David was close to death?
Then Nathan said, My lord, the king, you have said, Adonijah shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne. For he has gone down today and helped sacrifice oxen and fatlings and sheep in abundance. He has invited all the king's sons and the commanders of the army and Abiathar. Am I saying that right? Abiathar,
Abiathar, right,
the
yes.
priest. And behold, they are eating and drinking before him. They have said, Long live King Adonijah.
Okay. So Adonijah decided that he was going to make himself king, and so he kind of went ahead and anointed him king, and he got kind of half of the people to help him. He even had the priests divided up. He had Abiathar, he didn't have Zadok there, and so he gets this kind of group of people. So he is going to replace David, and now, where did this come from? David had multiple wives. Remember that? Okay. So actually, Adonijah, the priest, Adonijah is David's fourth son. Okay. So usually the first son becomes king. You remember why maybe we are down to number 4 now? Because Absalom killed Amnon, and Joab killed Absalom.
I'll do it.
And
start killing people.
Yeah, and they apparently David had another son that died in infancy. So you're down to number 4 now. And so Abiathar is number 4, but that is not the man that is to be king. Solomon is the one that is to be king. So they went to David, and David said, here's what you do. You go anoint Solomon. So David had this thing. Let me read 38 and 39. So Zadok the priest. Now this is the other priest. Abiathar was involved in the anointing of Adonijah, or the coronation of Adonijah. Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, the Cherethites and the Pelethites. Now remember, that's interesting, Cherethites and Pelethites. These were kind of mercenaries that kind of David's army, little private army that he had when Saul was chasing him. So these actually, when he comes to power, they become kind of his personal bodyguard, the Cherethites and the Pelethites. They were probably actually from Crete, but at any rate, went down and had Solomon ride on King David's mule. So what's the big thing of having somebody ride on your mule? Kings, when they went out to war, what would they ride on?
A horse.
Right. And so, but in peaceful times, they would ride, they'd ride on a mule. That's interesting. A lot of people realize that. So when David said, go, have all the guys get together and then put Solomon on my mule. Okay, when the people saw that, they said, okay, this has David's approval. And so Zadok the priest and took the horn of oil from the tent and anointed Solomon, and they blew the trumpets, and the people shouted, Long live King Solomon, long live King Solomon. So Solomon is anointed king over Israel. And when Adonijah saw that, he became very fearful, and he came and bowed down. Later on, though, I don't think we get it today. Later on, though, Adonijah will actually be put to death. And so, you know, remember the prophecy that the sword would not leave David's house? That certainly came to pass. That I mean,
Yes.
you know, so you think you've got problems. So anyway, Adonijah tried to usurp this thing about. Let me ask you a question. As we read through the Bible, does it strike you that these biblical heroes have their own set of issues?
Yes, that make me feel very normal.
Yeah. I mean, this is. I mean, you know.
Because wasn't Solomon's mama Bathsheba?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know that story.
Yeah.
And we won't get into that. We talked about last week. So, you know, this is not, which goes back to, you know, this whole thing of having multiple wives, this was never God's plan. He allowed it to happen. So,
But he can also take our terrible decisions and use them to glorify him.
yes, he can. He can. And that's, you know, I want to say this, Shay. That's a fine line in terms of our interpretation of that, because he can take our bad decisions, but it never justifies bad decisions. And don't forget, David paid a terrible. Can you imagine having a family where everybody's killing everybody else?
The sons killing each other.
I mean, it's just, you know, so.
But there's none of our decisions beyond redemption.
No, that you're right about that. You are right about that. That God's grace is amazing. I will say this, and we'll leave this there, is that none of our decisions are beyond redemption, but as we progress in those areas, it gets harder and harder to repent. So, just leave it. Okay, very good. Would you read the second question, Shay?
According to 1 Kings 2, verses 1 through 4, what charge did David give Solomon as he was becoming king? Did Solomon wind up following David's advice?
Okay, so if you would, Austin, read chapter 2, 1 through 4. And this is David's about to die. He's given a charge, you know, kind of normal thing that you would think somebody. But let's listen to this very carefully. So read 2, 1 through 4, if you would.
As David's time to die drew near, he charged Solomon his son, saying, I am going the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and show yourself a man. Keep charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments, his ordinance and his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed in all that you do and wherever you turn. So the Lord may carry out his promise which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons are careful of their way, to talk before me in truth, with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel.
So he gives him this charge as he's dying, literally, that he should follow God's commands and follow the law of Moses. Remember that in the first 5. In fact, the kings of Israel were supposed to have their personal copy of the law of Moses. They were constantly reading it, the things that they were supposed to do. And that obedience to God would be blessed. So did Solomon wind up following David's advice?
I think he tried really hard.
He tried really hard. We'll get to his downfall later on. But he did try for a while, but I think we can say in the end he does. Clearly, in the end he doesn't. Clearly, in the end he doesn't. He does try, you see this real turning point in his life that's going to come later on. Now, remember this. There were a number of things that God told when he said he had kings, tell them not to do. There were 3 things in particular. They were not to multiply horses. Why weren't you supposed to multiply horses? It seems strange. Don't get tons and tons of horses.
The significance with war? Maybe?
Yeah, it was implement of war. I mean, horses were great. And if you had horses combined with chariots, I mean, that was, you know, everybody's afraid of that. Okay, do not multiply horses, do not multiply silver and gold, and do not multiply wives. That's what Solomon did.
All of them.
Yep, all of the above. All of the above. So that's going to wind up being his downfall, and we'll kind of look at that a little bit later. Okay. Now, here's a fascinating verse. God appears a couple of times to Solomon, 2 times individually. But we're going to read the first time he appeared to Solomon here in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 5. So would you read that, Austin? 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 5.
Let's see, let me get turned to it. In Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night, and God said, "Ask what you wish me to give you."
So he appears to Solomon in a dream. And so look down at verse 9, Shay. What does Solomon ask for?
An understanding heart to judge your people and to discern between good and evil.
A heart to judge and understanding good and evil. He essentially asks for wisdom, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so was God pleased with that request?
Yes.
And so God says, because you asked for this, I will give you other things as well. Now this brings us to a fascinating story where God confirmed his wisdom. And you have a situation where 2 women have 2 babies that are just a couple days apart, maybe 3 days apart.
Of course.
And
3.
yeah, there you go. There you go. That's one of the numbers. Okay. So what happened in the case of the 2 women and the 2 babies? You remember that story?
I do. So the one lady or they both had a baby. One of the babies died, and the
Remember how she
mother-
died?
Didn't she smother the baby?
She rolled over on it.
Yeah.
And these were actually prostitutes.
Yeah.
You know, and so they lived in apparently a communal house and everything.
Or a brothel or something.
Yeah, I guess. And so at any rate, the one lady rolls over on the baby. So pick up the story.
And then she goes and swaps her baby with this other lady's baby.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the mama of that has the dead baby now goes to the judge, I guess.
And the
Or
judge
to
is Solomon.
King, is
Yeah,
Solomon, and
yeah.
says that this lady took her baby and she wants her baby back. And the way Solomon solves it is says, well, give me the baby that's still alive and we'll cut the baby in half. And the real baby mama says, no, don't do that. Let her have it.
Yeah. And so he does this, and so the mother that says, let her have the baby, don't kill it, he takes the baby and gives the baby to the mother that did not want the baby hurt.
Yeah.
And so so everybody everybody heard that, and immediately, wow, how could he think of that? And it was such a decisive act that, Solomon is known for this just tremendous wisdom. And his fame goes out through really kind of just the entire world. And so, exactly how smart is Solomon? In the ancient world, it would kind of, if you think of it, this would be later than Solomon, by about 800 years, I guess. But Aristotle in particular is known just to have this kind of knowledge of everything. I mean, Plato was kind of more of a pointed philosopher, and but Aristotle is just known to know kind of everything. Well, before Aristotle, the other person that would be kind of on the same level of him would be Solomon. And it kind of reminds you, because what did Solomon know about? Let's kind of read this in chapter 4, verses 29 through 34. A long section there, but would you mind reading that, Austin? Chapter 4, verses 29 through 34?
Now God gave Solomon wisdom and very great discernment and breadth of mind, like the sand this is on the seashore.
Let's talk about sand. Like breadth. He knew about kind of everything. We're talking about he had all kinds of subjects that he knew about. And actually this comes out in Ecclesiastes as well. But go ahead and read 30 and following.
Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all sons of the east and the wisdom of Egypt.
And those guys in Egypt, and those guys were known as the smart guys at that time, but, they were nothing compared to him. So go to verse 31. Austin.
For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan and Zerite.
Ethan the Arizite, Heman, Calcol and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was known in the surrounding nations. So, do you think everybody knew about him? Now we get a story of a queen coming from southern Arabia. Remember her? In fact, she's a legendary queen, and her name was the Queen of
Sheba.
Very good, Queen of Sheba. And so everybody knows about him. And so let's read about his proverbs and his songs and everything.
He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees and the cedar that is in Lebanon, even in the hyssop. God, these names, man.
Yeah.
I tell you what. And that grows on the wall, and spoke of also animals and the birds and creepy things and fish. Men came from all peoples to hear his wisdom of Solomon, from all the kings of the earth who had heard this wisdom.
Okay. Think of it, and this just is a little bit right here. So the Proverbs, 3,000 Proverbs, and the songs. So he's in poetry, he's in literature, he's in music, spoke of the trees, botany, and this is where it does really remind you of Aristotle. Aristotle spent a lot of time classifying things. Apparently, Solomon does the same thing. He apparently, has kind of classified all the animals and all the plants and even really small things. He spoke of animals and birds and creeping things and fish. And you kind of get the impression here. And they said this of Aristotle. That Aristotle's eyesight must have been unbelievable to see like little teeny things that are almost microscopic and stuff. And it seems like Solomon talking about creeping things. He apparently had this ability in botany, in zoology, this is just, touching the tip of the iceberg here. So he has, he probably is one of those people, there's literally kind of this thought that Solomon and I keep going to Aristotle, but he reminds me so much of Aristotle in this, that they basically kind of knew everything there was to know at that time. David spent his life fighting and building an empire and being a warrior king. And Solomon spends his life gaining all this knowledge and all this wisdom.
I bet Bathsheba protected him quite a bit and sheltered him and probably encouraged him, wouldn't you think, after her son died?
Yes. I think that's a good point. I honestly have never had even thought of that. But yeah, because as a mother you would think this. A lot of these things do go back to a mother. And so, yeah, she did this. So let me ask you this. So does he have the raw material to be a great leader? Yeah. He's got wisdom. Wisdom is not about what you know. It's about the ability to apply what you know. So he's got wisdom. He's clearly got knowledge. He's got all this. And you're kind of like, okay, if you got God, you got wisdom and knowledge of God first, then you got wisdom, and then you have knowledge. How can you fail? And so,
The rest of the story.
yeah. But before we get to the bad part of the downfall, it's kind of amazing if you read there, just kind of where he's at. But go ahead and read question number 6, if you would. Excuse me, number 5.
Can you describe the temple which Solomon built in 1 Kings chapter 6?
Now, we're not going to read this. There's a lot to read here, but let me just kind of describe the temple. So Solomon builds this incredible temple, some 7 years in the building of the temple. And the temple he brings in cedar from Lebanon. One of the most amazing things about the temple is they do have it planked in silver, in cedar and all this. But the amazing thing about the temple is the fact that they quarried the stones. Get this, they quarried the stones, and it said, in the building of the temple, no sound of an iron tool could be heard.
Right, how did that happen?
What that means is it has to be cut absolutely precisely. You're not doing any adjustments on it when you're getting there. The stones are already cut. It has to be like, think of you ever seen these kind of movies, these log houses, documentaries, log houses they build? They build them, put them together, do all the cutting. They actually put them together, and they bring them to the spot, and they set them up again, so you don't have to do any cutting or stuff like that because you've already put it together. That's kind of what I think you've got in a situation like this, is that, I'm not saying they put the temple together before they got it there. I don't know how that could take place. But it was so precisely measured out that, when it got there, it was just all put together, which is really quite amazing if you think of that.
And his ability to get the resources. I mean, I know God ultimately handled that, but just the way he got the resources there for the temple.
He really did. And there's a couple of things there. One is that, the cedars in Lebanon and that, he was a friend of Hiram, the king of Tyre, and he was able to do that, get that cedar from there. But the neat thing about the temple being built in Jerusalem, Jerusalem has, the area here is basically, there's tons and tons of hard cinnamonium limestone, which is a very hard form of limestone. So they cut the limestone out basically right in Jerusalem. So they didn't have to, they didn't have to bring it a ways, but it was basically close by where they could build it. And so, here they built it, and some of the things about the temple were just unbelievable. Let me just give you one thing. The sea. There's all kinds of beautiful objects. The sea, they called it a sea, was basically this giant wash basin that was used by the priest in purification stuff. Okay, the sea is, I want to think the sea, I'd have to go back and measure, I don't think it's like 30 feet across, okay, which means it's a giant swimming pool is what it is. And it is cast bronze, and it's a handbreadth thick. So think of your hand being this way, and they said you could not weigh the bronze in it. Okay, remember the sea, this great thing, set on the pedestal of 12 bulls. 3 bulls looking the 4 different directions, and then this thing was setting on top of it. And it's just, it's just amazing what they had. So Solomon builds the temple and the glory of the temple, and he leads this beautiful prayer of dedication after the temple is built, and I just can't scratch the surface. The temple itself is has let's just talk about one aspect of the temple because we can't talk about it. The most holy place. Now, the most holy place is a room that is 30 feet wide, 30 feet long, and 30 feet tall. In other words, it's a perfect cube. Does that remind you of anything?
Yes, heaven.
Yes. The New Jerusalem is 1,500 miles wide, 1,500 miles deep, and 1,500 miles high. Always the temple, whether it's these views of heaven, the tabernacle, the temple, and heaven itself. Because the tabernacle and the temple, the most holy place, is just a pattern.
Of heaven,
Of heaven.
a reflection.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, anyway. So if you go into the most holy place in the temple, it's 30 by 30 by 30. Okay. And the thing that you will notice, well, first of all, you wouldn't go in it. Only the high priest went in on the Day of Atonement. But at any rate, they had 2 carved, first of all, forget about, I'm not even going to go into all of the decorations. But if you go into the Holy of Holies, first of all, everything that you see is gold. The whole room, ceiling, floor, everything. There's paneling, but then gold was hammered, sheets of gold were hammered against the wall, so everything that you see is gold. and then there is two cherubim, and they literally stretch from one side to the other. They touch the wall and they touch together. They're massive things. They're like these wings that are 15 feet long and everything. So if you went into the Holy of Holies, everything would be gold, some ornate decorations that represented God, and then the two cherubim that guard the presence of God. And then, of course, what was brought into the most holy place was the Ark of the Covenant. And this is where God would meet with his people. And unlike the idols around them, the Ark of the Covenant is not an idol. The Ark of the Covenant is simply a place where God meets with his people. So it's just, we go on and on. But so let's put what Solomon has. Solomon builds a temple. He has a unique relationship with God. He has tremendous wisdom, and he has knowledge. So the question is, how do you mess it up when you got all that going for you? Well, the Bible tells us how you mess it up. You know, so if anybody thinks they're in a position, oh, I can't possibly fail, that's really not true. So let's turn over to 1 Kings chapter 11, if you would, and we'll read kind of what happened. Let's read that first sentence there, if you would, Austin.
Okay. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, and Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women.
Yeah. And so he's got all these women.
Y'all, that's how you get messed up,
Yeah.
y'all.
And so this is what happens.
Imagine that.
And so read verse 3. How many does he have altogether?
700.
700 wives.
300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. Yeah, daggone, man.
Yeah.
I love Shelby, but one's enough. I
You
think
know,
a lot of people can agree
And
on
most
that.
of these, this is not simply a case of unbridled lust, although that's a big part of it. I mean, you don't have 1,000 wives and concubines just for that. Most of these were political arrangements. Because, for example, if, let's say, you're a king, Austin, and I'm a king, well, if I give my daughter to you in marriage, the chances of me attacking you just become much less. Because, you know, my daughter and my family might get hurt. Well, that's the thought in a lot of these things. They kind of seal. So this was what it was. So remember, what were the three things God told him not to do, the kings not to do? Don't multiply horses, don't multiply gold, don't multiply wives. So he did this. And
Where does it say that?
that's back in the Pentateuch.
Okay.
So it says that. If you want to read, let me read something else. This is in chapter 10. Listen to this. Now the weight of the gold which came, and I'm reading from chapter 10, verse 14. Now the weight of the gold which came into Solomon in 1 year was 666. Why do we get 667? 666 talents of gold. You know how much a talent weighs? Somewhere between 75 and 100 pounds. So 666, let's take the low number times 75. How much gold is that?
I don't know. Go ahead and spit it out.
That's multiplying gold. That is multiplying.
And why is it 666? Is that to give like an indication this is part of
Money's
his
the root of all
downfall,
evil.
Yeah.
or?
I don't know. I think it's just a literal number there. And so, any rate, it comes down. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory overlaid with refined gold. There were 6 steps to the throne and a round top, and to the rear and its rear. Its arms on each side of the seat, and 2 lions standing beside it. 12 lions were standing there on the steps, one on one side, with nothing like it was found. All of King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold.
And then it goes on to talk about his chariots and his horsemen,
Yeah,
2 and 26.
yeah, and so multiplying gold, multiplying horses. I mean, when you're drinking out of can you imagine a leader today that had a gold cup? How much political trouble he would get in? I mean, people would just be,
Where is all this gold? It didn't disappear.
Well, I can't answer that question. I don't know. But a couple of places it came from, the gold mines apparently were in Ophir. And before you take off and hunt for Ophir to find where the gold mines are, many people have already tried that. We're not exactly sure where Ophir was. Some people think it was kind of perhaps in the highlands of Ethiopia and stuff, in that area and stuff, but nobody knows. But anyway, this gold would come from everywhere. And, where did this gold go? Later kings used this gold, a lot of it, to pay off other people that were attacking Jerusalem to keep them from not attacking later on down the road. That happens later on.
Dispersed.
So, people that get wealth, they never keep it. You know that. I mean, that just winds up kind of
But
going.
that's a lot of gold.
Yep. No, it is. Okay. So let's get back to the point here. Because I chased that rabbit. That was on me. But so let's talk about this for a minute. So all the wives, and let me go back read to 11, start in verse 6, and just read 6, 7, and 8 if you would, Austin. Just kind of fill it up.
Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not follow the Lord fully, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for...
Okay, what is a high place? He built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, the mountain that's east of Jerusalem. You know what mountain that is? What is mountain that's east of Jerusalem? That's probably the Mount of Olives. That's the mountain from which Jesus descended back to God. So, and Moloch, the detestable god of the sons of Ammonites. So he builds these. So what is a high place?
An idol, a shrine,
A high place is a place of worship. And this too, back in the Pentateuch, God said, don't go to the high places under every spreading tree, and because this is where these pagans would worship. So Solomon is doing all these things. And
Now I would imagine, because he says not to go to these high places, is it a place of wrong worship, or?
oh yeah,
Okay.
it's idol worship.
Okay.
In fact, when he built here, listen to this, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem, and from Moloch, the detestable god of the sons of Ammon. Remember what Moloch was used for?
he sacrificed children, didn't he?
Uh-huh. What it probably means is some children that Solomon fathered by some of these multiple wives were probably sacrificed.
And the fact that this was the mountain east of Jerusalem, wasn't it when we were studying before about the east, it being significant? Wasn't it the gate at the east of Eden?
Yes, but if you think of Jerusalem, let's come back to Jerusalem here, that the glory of God came from the east. And when Jesus Christ comes back, he'll come from the east of Jerusalem, Mount of Olives. When the glory departed, it left from the east. So this is all significant. And it's all it is an affront to God. So how did Solomon mess up? He didn't obey God. And these wives led his heart astray. And he builds all these places of worship to these demonic idols. Our time is about it, but I do want to show this. God clearly becomes very angry with Solomon. Okay, and so God begins to chip away at his empire. Several things here. Let me read this in verse. Let me read verse 14. Then the Lord raised up an adversary. Where did this adversary come from?
The Lord.
The Lord raised up an adversary to Solomon. Hadad, the Edomite. He was in the royal line of Edom. So he's raised up an adversary. Look at verse 23 in the same chapter, chapter 11, verse 23. He raises up another adversary. And this is God's doing.
Rezon,
Yeah, Rezon, who was the king of what?
son of Eliada, who had fled from his lord Hadadezer, king of Zobah.
Yeah, that's a place in the north. Okay, God raised up another adversary to him, Rezon, the son of Eliadiah, who fled from Hadadezer, king of Zobah. So he's raising up enemies. Now, okay, this is very interesting because read verse 26.
Then Jeroboam the son of Nebat and Ephraimite from Zerada, Solomon's servant, whose mother's name was Zerah, a widow, also rebelled against the king.
Now, this is an Ephraimite, means from the tribe of Ephraim. This is one of his own people, Jeroboam. So he has external threats and internal rebellion. And so the kingdom, so what eventually happens to the kingdom after Solomon?
They're not a kingdom, they're like falling apart.
It divides into two.
Into
The north
other,
and the south. This Jeroboam will become king of the 10 northern tribes, and Solomon's son Rehoboam will become king of the southern tribe of Judah. And then later on, the Assyrians will take the northern kingdom away kind of permanently. And then the Babylonians will come later on and take the southern kingdom into the Babylonian exile. So, because of his sin. Now, the interesting thing is, remember, in our time is up, remember the covenant that God made with David. You will never fail to have a man to sit on the throne of Israel. So even though all this kingdom is destroyed and taken away, how does the promise of God in the Davidic covenant, how is it fulfilled? Well, in the fullness of time, God will send his son, Jesus. Remember they called him the King of the Jews, but they rejected him, put him to death. And that's why all Christians believe, as the Bible says, that kingdom has not yet been fulfilled. But that promise will be fulfilled when Jesus Christ returns to establish his kingdom. So, anyway, went a lot longer than we should have, but there's a lot there to cover, and all we talked about was Solomon. I mean, we didn't even deal with some of the other kings. So, read the Bible. It is fascinating. The book of Kings, 1st, 2nd Kings, and Chronicles, and 1st, 2nd Samuel gives you the history of the nation of Israel. So, God bless you guys. Have a great evening.